I recently read the biography or autobiography of Ajahn Jia. It's called Gold Wrapped in Rags. And I, first of all, just feel so grateful to all the people who put those biographies and autobiographies together. The people who write it and edit it and publish it and distribute it and talk about it. And they're just such a delight to read. And especially like this one and Michi Kao's, those books talk specifically about the moment in which they became fully enlightened and what that experience was like. And these stories are out there, and not a lot of them are captured in print, not a lot of them are accessible to anyone with an internet connection. And they're just so fun and amazing to read. I heard, I don't know if this is true, I remember it being a reputable source. I don't remember what source it was, but I remember reading or hearing this fact one time that when we read, our brain, at least on some smaller scale, to some level, responds as if it were actually doing it themselves. So if we read a book about cooking mashed potatoes, then on some smaller scale, to some level, the brain has activity that as if it were actually cooking mashed potatoes. So imagine how powerful it can be to read about the moment in which someone becomes fully enlightened. So that's, I guess, the first thing that popped in my head is you can find out exactly what it was like. And not just the moment where Ajahn Jia became fully enlightened, but also the moment in which he crossed into the penultimate stage and became a non-returner. So good. Okay, and that brings up the fact that for Ajahn Jia, it was I always loved doing book reports as a kid. All right, I loved reading the books and reporting back to the class what I found interesting. So I guess this is that. Okay, so Ajahn Jia, another thing I found interesting was that he found body contemplation to be so rich and fruitful as a practice. So he often spoke about going into meditation and in his mind imagining each part of the body cut up and arranged before him in a pile or something like that. And I didn't commit any of the autobiography to memory, so as I talk about what I read, it's all going to be a paraphrasing. None of it is word for word. I'm doing my best, and it would be great if you wanted to fact check yourself in the book, because then you will have read the book. Anyway, so he talked about how amazing body contemplation was for his practice, and examining the flesh, the parts, discovering that there was nothing to be desired sexually or in any other way. Yeah, that really brought him really far down the path. And so I found that really interesting because for me, body contemplation has never had any teeth to it. And I was thinking about a really good friend of mine, really close friend, who teaches gross anatomy at UC Davis. And she is surrounded by body parts all the time. And I thought, I imagine it would not have much teeth for her either, because she's actually surrounded by the real life version of what Ajahn Jia was imagining. And, she's not fully enlightened yet. So I actually had tea with her yesterday, and I was like, do you think it would be useful do you think it would produce any insight for you or advance you down the path if you did body contemplation? And she thought about it for a second, and she was like, absolutely not. She gets with her lab assistant, teaching assistant friends, and they just work on sawing these bodies into parts, dissecting these bodies into finer and finer parts, just like Ajahn Jia did in his mind. They're doing it in real life. And as they're doing it, they just have their legs crossed and they're gossiping about their lives. And it's really just not a big deal at all to them. It's like they're going for a walk or in a sewing circle, except they're dissecting dead bodies. And I bring this up because even though contemplation brought Ajahn Jia so far down the path, and it was the thing that he taught again and again after he became a prominent teacher, after he became fully enlightened, he would basically just give this talk all the time, to the point where other people directly asked him, "Hey, can you talk about something else?" And he was like, "No." Anyway, it was so useful and rich for him and for other people, for me, for my friend. There, it's not useful at all. And even, I wonder, I have some theories about this. Like, maybe as people in the Western culture, like, the body and the mind are seen as so separate that maybe that has something to do with why it's less useful. In the Chinese astrology, I'm born with a lot of fire element in my blood, and that is said to make bodies less fruitful, like bodies less meaningful. That's not the right word either, but less nerves and concern around seeing the body as the flesh and blood and bone that it actually is. Anyway, just some theories. I don't actually know why. But where was I going with this? Yeah, even for someone who has gone all the way to the end of the path, Ajahn Jia, and he swears by this method, we still have to pick it up and check it for ourselves before we commit to that method, before we really internalize it and apply it for our own practice. Oh yeah, when we went to Ajahn Suchar's monastery, there was this book there that was available for anybody who wanted to take it home. It was just pure body contemplation. You can find it on his website if you're interested. It does say in the link, for advanced practitioners only. And it's just a bunch of pictures of bodies that have died from rather graphic reasons. So, for example, a lot of swollen corpses who died by drowning, limbs that were deeply cut and bloodied from knife wounds. I'll spare you the other details, but for some people, and some people I think maybe just have a more sensitive constitution. Maybe they have a different set of circumstances as prescribed by their Chinese astrology readings. But some people might flip through this and immediately get nauseated, and other people might flip through as if it were a fashion magazine. We all have different circumstances. And even when there's a method that someone who has walked the path to its finish, even when they swear by it, even if that's the one method that they teach, the one method that they tell everyone to practice, if it has no teeth for us individually, then we need to look for what is useful. I also felt really moved to hear, oh, by the way, Ajahn Jia crossed the finish line when he was in his early 30s. It was shortly before Ajahn Mun died. And Ajahn Mun died when Ajahn Jia was 33 years old. So he must have been like 32 or 33. That was really fun to find out. I feel like a lot of people just see Nibbana as this faraway, abstract thing, this cloud on the horizon, this misty gray cloud, and not necessarily. So it can be really fun to read these biographies, because then they make it so concrete and real. Ajahn Jia was sitting under the overhang, like a cliff overhang. He was 33 years old or 32 or so. He saw X, Y, and Z in his mind as it happened. This like little shred of mind, or a little shred of unawakened mind. I don't really know exactly what it was, but you can read it in detail in the book by yourself. the way I interpreted it was this little shred of something that was not fully realized yet. And when he trained his mind on it and kept his awareness on it, he noticed that it became more and more still when he did. So then he kept just training his awareness on it, and it got more and more subtle, more and more faint, just fading away a little bit each time until there was nothing left and he was finished with his work. And that was what it was like in like the mid 20th century for a Dutanga monk in Thailand. And it is something that is still happening around the world today. And for someone in the modern Western world, like, are they sitting under the overhang of a cliff in remote wilderness? Like, maybe, and also maybe not. Yeah, we can look around our world, our life, as we live it on a day-to-day life and reflect. You know, it could happen in our bedroom, in our living room, at the meditation center we love to go to. You can open your underwear drawer and reflect, which pair will I be sitting in or lying in or standing in when it happens for me? It's a real thing that's still happening to people all around the world today. So as we read these biographies, we can make it more and more concrete, understand what it's like for others, and also have our brain go through that event on a very, very dialed back level. And maybe that will just be one small step closer, another small step closer to having that happen for ourselves. I also really loved hearing about what Ajahn Jia was like after he became fully enlightened. That was really valuable knowledge too. I think sometimes it feels like for some teachers, it's like they. Okay, I will just go through this very briefly, but I think for some teachers, it's like only the stuff. It's only matters to talk about what it's like before enlightenment. And I understand that, right? Because it's like you just want to get people out of the burning house. And then after the firefighter, they're responsible for just getting people out of the burning house. And after that, it's like their business, the survivor's business, what they do with their lives now that they're healthy and safe and not under threat of dying under a burning building. And it can be really fun to find out what it's like for people after they're safe, after they go on. And here's why. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I found. I'm so excited. I'm tripping over my words, but I'll tell you what I found so interesting about reading about Ajahn Jia after he became fully enlightened. And it was clearer that he became fully enlightened before Ajahn Mun died. And also it was so clear by reading the book how much devotion, how much love he had for Ajahn Mun, how much gratitude. And then Ajahn Mun died. And it was really interesting and valuable to read about how when Ajahn Jia found out about the death of his beloved main teacher, his master teacher, how he sobbed, how he, if I remember correctly, he like went off to the back of a kuti or something like that and just cried, just sobbed. And in the moment when he traveled to see Ajahn Mun's body to pay his final respects, when he saw Ajahn Mun's corpse lying there, he just couldn't stop the tears flowing down his face. And I think that's really valuable to read about because I think there is this common misperception that once someone becomes fully enlightened, then they have no unpleasant feelings. And clearly, from reading this, that is not true. And clearly, from reading many biographies, from hearing directly from people who I believe are fully enlightened, from hearing from their attendants, that is not true. Grief still arises, shame still arises, irritation still arises, and they are free from it. So I think when people hear like, oh, when you become fully enlightened, you become free from suffering, I think there's this misunderstanding that it's free from suffering in the same way that the bread I eat is free from gluten because Kyle is gluten sensitive, or the milk that we drink is free from dairy because Kyle is lactose sensitive. In the way that it's like there's no dairy, there's no gluten. So people, I think, apply that to the Kruba Ajahns and they say, oh, they are free from suffering, therefore they must never have any kind of suffering, any kind of unpleasant emotion. And I don't think that's it. I think that unpleasant feeling arises, and there's so much testimony to this in their biographies, in the way they speak, in the way their attendants speak, their most intimate relationship friends speak. The unpleasant feeling arises and they are free from it because they know it is anicca, anatta. They know the nature of dukkha, that unpleasant feelings just arise because unpleasant conditions have arisen. And for as long as those conditions are in place, then the unpleasant feeling will just be there. And as soon as those conditions shift, which they always do, then that unpleasant feeling will cease also. And in that way, they are free from suffering. They are not imprisoned by it, not enslaved by it. They don't take it personally. They have no delusions about it. And yet, that unpleasant feeling still arises. And why is this important? So for as long as I thought that arahants just never have unpleasant feelings, then anytime an unpleasant feeling arose in myself, then I would be like, God damn it, I'm so unenlightened. I'm so far from where I want to be. And that was just another arrow of suffering for me. Just one more big hurdle, roadblock, before I would just face my suffering head on and let it pass through my system. However, after I understood that unpleasant feeling still arises, like Ajahn Gandha said, the practice is the same. For the enlightened person or the unenlightened person, the practice is the same. So when I got that, then anytime unpleasant feeling arose, then that roadblock was not there anymore. And I started to finally understand in practice that whenever unpleasant feeling arose, or pleasant or neutral or whatever freaking feeling, just face it. Just hold it lightly and know it as anicca, anatta. Know it as the dukkha that it is. And in that way, we are free from suffering. So I heard the question recently, like, oh, but like in the suttas, like, isn't it said that arahants no longer experience anger and anagamis no longer experience anger or greed? Yes, that is true. I think that is true. And there is no conflict between all of that stuff that I just said and the fact that those who are either finished or very close to finished with the path no longer experience anger or greed. And here's what I think. I think that in someone who is anagami or arahant, that irritation can arise, like immense amount of irritation can arise, and that is not the same thing as anger, because in anger, baked into the word, my experience of the word, my experience of anger is me being angry at somebody else, me blaming for someone for my suffering, me pointing the finger, me falling for the trap of the sense of self, me versus someone else. versus irritation is just, oh, like these set of circumstances have caused great irritation to arise. Sometimes enormous amounts of irritation to arise. And that is due to the circumstances of these conditions. And that irritation can... Okay, so imagine putting a pot of water on the stove and turning up the heat real high. And it gets scaldingly hot, maybe even simmers, but it never reaches its boiling point. It never actually boils over. I think that's what it's like. Because at some point, I think that people realize, the practitioner realizes that if you're gonna be angry at that one person, then understanding the nature of causality, you would actually have to be angry at the 10,000 factors that led up to that one person taking that action that angered you or saying that thing that angered you. And to be angry at 10,000 things is to be angry at nothing. And same with greed, I think, baked into the word, my experience of the word and my experience of greed, inherent in that feeling, there's this feeling of, I want that thing that you have, or I just want that thing, and when I get that thing, I will be happy. And understanding that there are upsides and downsides to everything. Even when the deep practitioner, as I understand it, as I have heard it, even when the deep practitioner has a strong preference for something, I don't think it ever boils over into greed. Just understanding the upsides and downsides of everything, you know that even when you get that thing that you have such a strong preference for, you know that there's going to be a downside that comes with it. So why bother? Why bother getting greedy over that? And that greed, that anger becomes, as I have heard what it's like, that greed and that anger becomes like when you reach down to pick up a box that you think is very heavy, but actually you find out when you pick it up with a shock that there's nothing inside. It's actually very empty. It's nothing in there. And same with the capacity to become offended. I think, as I've heard, as I've read, I think that there's no longer the capacity to become offended because there's no sense of self left to be offended. However, the practitioner can still notice when people are being arrogant and condescending and weird, and that it is deeply unpleasant whenever they interact with X, Y, or Z person, and that maybe they will take a mental note to make that happen as unoften as possible. And there is no one to be offended. It was fun to read about how even after he crossed the finish line, Ajahn would have this really coarse behavior and call people, I don't think this is a direct translation from Thai, but he would call people like, oh, that jerk off over there. And in the autobiography, he was like, it's just fun to use that extra spicy word sometimes, don't you think? And again, I didn't memorize it word for word, but that's the sentiment that I got from reading the biography. Oh, and I loved reading about how he would just openly fart and burp and have this really wild, unrefined behavior. And when people were like, hey, like maybe you shouldn't fart and burp around everybody, especially the ladies. They're getting a little queasy. He would just be like, what the hell? Like this is just the body. What part of the body is not dirty? This is part of the natural process to fart and burp. You're so deluded you think the body is this clean, polished thing, and it's not. You can't see it, but I'm like literally kicking my feet in delight right now. So much fun. Um, there's a story in the autobiography where, oh my gosh, he was so funny. He was so funny. Okay, anyway, so he like went along with ceremony and decorum. It sounded like he went along with it when he had to, but there was a time when he was invited to the royal palace for some fancy meal with the royal people, with a bunch of monks. So this escort came to the monastery, a royal escort, not a sex worker escort, but a royal escort came to pick up the monks and bring them over to the royal palace. And when the royal escort came, Ajahn was like, "Oh, do I need my ceremonial fan?" And the royal escort said, "No, no, no, it's not necessary. Just come, bring your bowl, come as you are." And okay, so all the monks went to the royal palace. And then when it was time to start the ceremony, this other attendant in the royal palace was like, "Oh my gosh, why don't you have your fan?" And Ajahn was like, "Okay, okay, everybody stop what you're doing. I have to go back to the monastery." I'm kicking my feet in delight again. Yeah, and he just had this like really unruly behavior. He explained to everybody at the meal. He was like, that escort told me I didn't need my fan, so I didn't bring it." But he had this like really unruly behavior. Like he it sounded like he really loved doing construction projects for monasteries, and he had all this energy, and he just would often late at night, well past dark, he would still be like hammering away at some construction project. And this happened not once but twice, when the head monk at the monastery would come over and see what was happening, see who was causing all this ruckus. They would stand where he was digging the hole or hammering the work, and the head monk would be like, "Ajahn, what are you doing? It's nighttime. It's time for people to be quiet and to meditate." And they would say, "If I didn't know it was you, I would have thrown you out of the monastery." And then they would teach Ajahn in that moment, like, "Hey, now that we're prominently or widely recognized as deep practitioners, now that we're senior monks, we kind of have to behave in a way that inspires people. Okay, we can't be these unruly monkeys all the time." And that was another thing I found really inspiring and valuable about reading this autobiography. Was he had this admiration and reverence for the other practitioners around him who are fully enlightened, and never at any point did he think, "Okay, I'm done. I don't want to listen, or I don't need to listen to other people anymore." And he wrote specifically that he was eager to learn about practice from the others who had deep practice just like him, to learn from their perspectives, how they were teaching, how they were practicing. And I find that for people, as they progress deeper and deeper into practice, actually the more humble they are about asking questions and learning from everyone around them, the more they know that they don't know everything, the more open their heart is. So let's practice in the footsteps of Ajahn Jia. Maybe not causing a ruckus at night. Maybe not farting or burping loudly in public. Hey, unless you want to, all the power to you if you want to do that. But also maybe not. But definitely in all the ways that matter. His love of the Dhamma, his love of practice, his openness in the heart, his respect for the path and all those who walk it, his enthusiasm, his energy, his deep wisdom, in all these ways that matter. Let's practice well. Let's practice just like Ajahn Jia.